Hello and welcome to Honors Biology at Washington Township High School. So this class is going to probably be a little bit different than most of the classes that you're kind of used to, and there's going to be a lot less of lecturing and a lot less of the formal classroom and a little bit more of interactive stuff, or at least that's my goal. So we're going to start it out at the beginning, starting right with Chapter 1. So what happens we don't spend a whole lot of time on Chapter 1, but I think it's a good introduction to the class, good introduction to how we do things here, and I think you're going to be really excited. This also is going to kind of give us a roadmap for where we're going this year. Alright, so let's go. Alright, so this is where we're going to spend the end of the year. These larger levels of organization. Okay, so biology is organized by levels, and in these levels we have a lot of different classifications, different things we can study, different ways we can go about it. So at the largest is the biosphere. The biosphere is the whole thing. It's where all life exists, a little bit below the earth to all the way to a little bit in the air. Okay, so that encompasses basically all of the livable range on Earth. Alright, now we break it down into a biome. A biome is an area that has similar biotic and abiotic factors. So temperature, precipitation, sunlight, okay, those kinds of things affect which kinds of things live there, and that kind of creates the biomes. You've probably talked about these in elementary school, maybe a little bit in middle school. So, the tundra, the temperate forest, all of those things are different biomes. Okay? Then we have an ecosystem. An ecosystem is just an area where all of the abiotic and biotic factors, we look at all the abiotic and biotic factors. So in an ecosystem, if we were looking at Washington Township, the ecosystem would be the people, the squirrels, the dogs, the soil, the water, the air. Okay? All right. Now we come down to community. The community would just be the biotic factors. So once again, in Washington Township, the people, the dogs, the squirrels, all right, the cats, those kinds of things. If we were to think about a community in New Jersey, same thing. Now, the idea of community and ecosystem are a little fluid, and a lot of times scientists will actually determine the area that they're looking at, but it's all encompassed within one area. Okay? Now we get a little bit lower into population. So this is where we have one kind of biotic factor living in one area. So in the case of Washington Township, we would be looking at just the people. All right. Now, we'll lump species into this, and a lot of times when we talk about species and population, for us, they're going to be probably interchangeable. To be members of the same species, you have to be able to breed with each other and basically become grandparents. So you and another person have to be able to have kids, and then those kids have to be able to have kids. That basically determines that you are members of the same species. Now, scientists can talk about species on a very local level. Species in Washington Township, species in New Jersey, species on the East Coast, species in the U.S., or we can talk about species as far as the entire range that species lives in. So that's why species and population are kind of the same thing. Population is totally determined by what area you're looking at, and you can make that a very narrow area or a very large area. Now, levels of organization, which is where we're going to spend the beginning of the year. Okay, now there are some in the middle that we're not really going to talk about, but they are in your book. But just keep that in mind. That's more if you go into anatomy and physiology, you'll be spending those times at tissues and organs and organ systems and so on and so forth. All right, the smaller levels, which is where we're going to spend the beginning of the year. Okay, so once again, going down from largest to smallest, we've got individual organism. So this is one particular biotic factor. Now, an individual organism can be a single-celled organism, but most often at this level we're talking about multicellular organisms. So you, your dog, your cat, your plant, okay, those kinds of things are individual organisms. Cells, which can be considered an organism, or it can be a piece of a multicellular organism. Either way, this is where we first see the properties of life. This is where life exists, okay? And so that's really cool, all right? So this is where we first see life. Now we've got a couple of other things below cells that contribute to life, all right? So we have organelle, which is a functioning compartment inside some cells. You may have remembered in middle school talking about eukaryotic cells versus prokaryotic cells. If you don't, that's cool. We'll totally get there. But if you do, all right, that's the difference. Organelles are basically really tiny organs. So your stomach is an organ, and it does a particular job for your body. So that being said, an organelle is something that's really, really tiny inside a cell that does a particular job for that cell. And we'll talk about those. But like I said, this is just kind of an overview, so don't get all wrapped up in if you don't totally understand it at this point. Okay? So once again, organelles are in some cells but not in others. And then we've got molecules. So molecules is generally some sort of large compound that works inside cells and is kind of the building block of cells. It's not considered alive, okay? But if we don't have these molecules coming together to work together, then the cell can't be alive. So these are the building blocks of any given cell, and there are 4 major what are called macromolecules that we're going to talk about this year. We have carbohydrates, we have lipids, we have nucleic acids, and we have proteins. These 4 things all come together in various combinations to create a cell. And we're going to talk about that this year. So once again, molecules is kind of where we're starting the year, and then we're going to go up through all of these different levels of organization. So here's a picture. You have a very similar picture in your book. All right, starting with macromolecules at the bottom. All right, cells, groups of cells, which once again, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time here. This is really for anatomy and physiology. All right, then we have organisms, populations, communities, ecosystems, biospheres, and so on. So this is just kind of another picture. All right. Then a couple of other things I wanted to talk about. The scientific method. You've probably been hit over the head with this for years, okay? But I just want you guys to be aware that while there are steps, quote unquote, to the scientific method, it's not exactly perfect, okay? It's not one after the other, after the other, after the other, all right? Generally, we're going to start with making an observation, okay? And from there, we can choose a couple of different things to do. Depending on what that observation is, we can analyze that observation to end up going around, all right? Or we can then use that observation to help us ask a question, all right? That question is going to help us form what's called a hypothesis. Now, a hypothesis is a little bit more than an answer to that question, but that's good enough for us now, okay? With that hypothesis, let's say you observe a bunch of students wearing new sweatshirts, okay? And so your question is, why are these people wearing new sweatshirts? All right? And you could form a hypothesis by saying, these people are wearing new sweatshirts because the school store is carrying them. That's your hypothesis. The school store is now carrying these new sweatshirts. That's why people are wearing these new sweatshirts. Then, from that hypothesis, you would go into a testing phase, okay? And that testing phase, in this case, could be simply just asking people, hey, why do you have that sweatshirt? Why are you wearing that sweatshirt? Why are you wearing that sweatshirt? Okay? That could be your test in this kind of situation. And then you take those results and you analyze them. All right? You take all the answers to your survey, and you say, hey, okay. Now, if these people are saying, yes, the school store is carrying this brand new sweatshirt and it's really cool and I wanted it, then you can say, yes, that supports my hypothesis. You communicate that result. All right? If it doesn't support your hypothesis, if everybody's like, no, dude, I just really like the color, okay, that's no, then you have to kind of go back around. And I will tell you that no's are a lot more common in science than yeses. Okay? A lot of the stuff that we have learned in science and in the real world and so on and so forth has a lot more to do with us being wrong the first few times around than us being right the first few times around. Okay? So science is really cool because you don't have to be perfect and you don't have to be right. You just have to want to answer a question. All right? And that's what makes science so awesome. All right? So a lot of the different stuff this year, you're going to see pieces of this scientific method, but remember, it's not the step-by-step instruction manual that they gave you in middle school and in elementary school. It's a lot more complicated than that because we tend to go back around in circles. Okay? So that's okay. All right? We'll go from there. All right? One of the things you got to figure out is answer a question. So in this case, here's a question. Which skulls are which? Can you identify these skulls? So you've got 5 different skulls. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So on your paper, write down 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Try and answer 2 questions about these skulls. Number 1, what kind of food does it eat? All right? Is it an herbivore? Is it a carnivore? Is it an omnivore? Okay? Number 2, can you guess the species? You don't have to be specific. You can say human, you can say dog, you don't have to be real scientific about it, but just take a guess. Do you know which one's which? Okay? Gonna give you a few more minutes. All right, so we're going to talk about this in class when the video is done. If you are at home watching this, like you will be later on in the year, that would be something that you have to bring in for us to talk about, okay, tomorrow or whatever. But since we're doing this in class together, we're going to talk about it after the presentation, okay? And we're going to talk about why that's important. All right, so take some time to fill out your summary section of your Cornell notes. So that's going to be the section that's at the bottom of your piece of paper. So remember, your piece of paper is kind of organized like an eye, okay? And so at the bottom of the eye, all right, take some time, fill out the summary. And then on the left-hand side column, pull out some questions, some vocabulary, or some key points. Now I'm going to stop you here. If you're at home, you'll have plenty of time. You can pause it, you can, take your time, and I am going to upload this video so you guys can watch it if you need to again, even though we're doing it in class this time around.